Hey,
Hey
Justin.
there, Joe. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you as well. How are things?
Oh, I'm pretty busy.
You're out of Brooklyn,
Yep.
right?
I'm in Brooklyn. It's the temperature's dropped 30 degrees to a cool 80 degrees. It was hot.
Oh,
Um, it's, I'll take
nice.
it over winter, personally.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I'm normally in Austin. Today I'm in Oregon and it's
Oh,
gorgeous.
nice.
So I won't complain. They have socialized air conditioning up here, so that's all right. But Brooklyn is one of the boroughs, right?
Mhm.
So it's under the New York City five boroughs.
Yep.
So that was part of the mayoral race
Yes,
then was
there
Brooklyn as
was.
well.
It was. It's quite an earthquake. We'll see. I
All
think
right.
it's
Yeah.
it's not settled because there are a lot of people that are
Primaries.
distressed, and we'll see what happens. Um,
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting plug. I mean, some of his pitches are even like a city income tax. Pretty interesting.
yeah,
So
I mean, he
yeah,
he certainly taxes are big on his list because he's got a long list of things he wants to do, and he doesn't have a
yeah.
ton of experience or question his his
Yeah.
abilities.
He definitely got a lot of young support. I mean, I couldn't believe the data on how many
You know,
young college
it, it,
students are diving
Cuomo
in.
was um, kind of the big old ugly old school guy that was easy to go against. Um,
Yeah,
and ranked choice voting.
yeah,
People had their schemes and they worked. Um,
yeah. I love it. Let's dive in here. Welcome to the conversation where we unpack the wild, interconnected chaos shaping our world, including the population's decline and all the reasons for it. Our guest today is incredibly talented, Emmy nominated filmmaker Justin Schein. For 3 decades, Justin has been bringing impactful stories to the screen, and his newest film, Death and Taxes, arriving in theaters July 17th, promises to be no different. This isn't just about fiscal policy, it's a poignant exploration of America's division, seen through the surprising world of taxes and the very personal inheritances, both financial and societal, will pass down. Thank you for joining us
Thanks for
today,
having me.
Justin.
It's great to be here.
So I gotta apologize. My co-host has his sons visiting, and last minute something happened. So
I'm sorry. I was going to say,
he may.
my film is really a father and son story, so I find that appropriate. But I don't know about
I love
the
it.
flesh wound part of it.
Yeah, I don't know how severe it is, but hopefully he'll jump in. So we'll see
Life
how that
happens in
goes.
a way,
So
right?
hopefully everything's done. We can no longer say no children were hurt in the making of this. We now
He
had our
should
first
be,
casualties.
zooming in from
Now,
the emergency room personally.
exactly. Now, how long have you been kind of a raconteur and telling stories? I mean, is this something that you've been at this 30 years? Have you
Yeah,
been?
yeah. I mean, I a lot of those years were shooting other people's films. I'm a cinematographer as well. Um, I'm dyslexic, and so as a kid, I think I um, picked up the camera. I saw a way to interact with the world. Was kind of free of the written language was a stumbling block for me. And I fell in love with photography and then film. There's nothing like trying to film a scene that's unfolding. And unlike fiction film, which I have lots of friends that do, which in the making is super boring and laborious and hierarchical. Um, Documentary, you really grab a camera and you try to capture what's going on and then figure out how to put it together. Um, and Yeah, and because I'm a documentary filmmaker and I love to record things, I've been filming my family for a long time. Um, and so this film uses footage that I took starting in the late 90s of my parents really knowing where it was going.
I do appreciate you shared a link where I could watch it. It was interesting. You watch your parents interact themselves. What was it like growing up in that household? I hope you don't mind. I'm gonna throw some stuff out there. Just you made a piece of art, and I, being a viewer, I mean,
Oh,
this is how I viewed the piece
I
of
have,
art. So I'm just gonna throw some opinions
no,
out.
no, I'm expecting it. And I have made lots of films that are not so personal, and this is very personal. And so I myself up, and I should expect a personal question. What was it like? I mean, the heart of the film are my parents, and on first viewing, you get my dad. My mom is kind of the unsung hero. Um, but my dad was an amazing character in that he kind of lived the American dream. Growing up, I learned about the American dream movies and books, but my dad, I believe, lived it. He grew up the youngest son of immigrant garment workers in New York. Um, he was born in 1927, just before the Depression, and his family struggled through depression, and they were poor and from house to house because landlords were giving away free month's rent because they didn't find anybody to pay. Ended up living with my dad's grandparents who didn't speak English, they only spoke Yiddish. Uh, and he was super smart and super scrappy, became incredibly successful. And part of that, a big part of that was his intelligence and hard work. Also, growing up, I think this is a generational thing for people who grew up in the Depression. Yeah, every penny counted, and he saw what his parents had to do to make a buck, and he wanted to be successful so that his family didn't have to endure that. So, to the point where eventually he was the top CEOs in America. He was the head of CBS Records International in the 60s and early 70s, and then became president of Sony America. This big deal, this first American to run this Japanese division. And his childhood lessons of saving money was brought to the boardroom, and he was famous for being a hard ass. He was famous for being a cost cutter, and I think he tripled Sony's the time he was there. But he brought home too. He was
Right.
he could be really difficult. He had his rules about not wasting money, and I mean, I loved him a lot and learned a lot from him. But he was a handful.
Now, you had some paradoxes in there, and I'm gonna pull some of
Yeah,
this out. But
yeah,
you grew up with a trust fund, but your father, as I understood, was quite controlling. And I'm just throwing this out. I don't
hmm
mean anything direct, but he definitely had a vision, and he would do anything, as I've observed it. He'd do anything he could to make that vision come about. I mean, what kind of conundrums did you grow up in? Because one, you're the second child, so was pressure, maybe less on you, but you must have had this conundrum because you're like, my dad is a miser, saving every penny. Here I have an opportunity is given to me. And this one line in the film that I find really interesting that kind of brings up the point is he does say, I've done all this so you could do whatever you want. But then he's also frustrated
yeah,
that you wanted to do whatever you want and you didn't try to beat him on making, more money. So
yeah. No, there were definitely contradictions. I think at its heart, it's a film about my relationship with my dad, and I think having shown it for about 6 months now at festivals, people come up to me from all walks of life and all socioeconomic places saying that they recognize their relationship with dad and those contradictions. I think some of it is just inherent parenting and to be a son. But yeah, no, my dad could be very contradictory. He was very proud that he worked hard and put me in a position where I didn't have to struggle, where I could do the work that I loved. I mean, it was very important to him that I worked my ass off, and it wouldn't be tolerated for me not to. But and then he would also sometimes, well, I love that you're making films, but why can't you make real films? Films that make money. So yeah, he struggled. He struggled with himself. And one thing that's fascinating about my dad is that he could be very self-reflective. He could be a total bastard, and then he could stop and try to examine himself. So that made him, you know, at some point soon after Trump was elected, I was interested in making a film about the estate tax, and because this is something I had thought about with my dad, and I went out and people about it, and nobody would. Nobody wants to talk money. It's kind of the last taboo.
Well, you are bringing up death and taxes. I mean, we all know those are the two
Yeah.
avoidable things. So I can't see that being a big conversation starter for anyone.
Well, and people, all people, it's conflicted. You want to take care of your family. You want, even the most liberal people, you want to hold on to it because it's human nature. And I realized this showed me arguing with my dad about some of these issues. That it's, could be a really interesting foundation, this investigation.
As you delved into that, especially when you found this film trying to do that, I imagine that was amazing to say, wow, I can't believe I recorded some of these conversations. Some of it that came out, your mom, and you kind of hinted at this, and I would have taken the same way. Your mom is probably, the hero in the back that doesn't get as much mention. But how impactful was your mother in guiding your direction to get into a film? I mean, your father was supportive, it sounds like, but at the same time, like, why can't you make this film? But how supportive was your mother? I mean, she was in dance, she was in the arts. Is
Yeah,
that really where you
she's
kind of got the courage to say,
88 and she's dancing still every day. She's really amazing. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was so lucky to have these very different people. They were very loving and supportive, very different. My dad was very logical and very argumentative. And my mom, who was this artist dancer, was much more in touch with kind of her emotions. And so I was able to hopefully get the best from both worlds. And she took a lot of abuse from my dad, abuse physical. Like, he was really rough on her. And actually, the, what started my filming them was, when my dad retired in the early 90s. He had gone from being this very powerful businessman to just being home all the time, and with a tremendous amount of energy and anger, and all of that seemed to be directed at my mom. And I didn't. It was clear that something had to. A big, one of the defining moments was the fact that my dad, who had become very focused on reducing his taxes, that became one of his new hobbies. He was better at that than golf.
even more than a hobby? They literally moved to Florida for over 6 months of the year
Yeah,
for well over a decade. This becomes a frictional point in their marriage, and it's the inheritance tax they're trying to avoid, right?
yeah. Well, there's a lot of taxes you avoid in Florida. The inheritance tax was a big one, and my mom, being a supportive, loving person, gave it a go for more than a decade. But as my dad kind of grew grumpier, and as I think she saw that this was the end of her life. I mean, she was kind of looking out at her future and decided that she didn't want to really be there making him sandwiches and in a place that she couldn't go to the Broadway shows, and she couldn't dance with high quality dancers. Eventually, she said no more. And he kind of exploded and refused to be flexible, and ended up heading down to Florida by himself. As I say in the movie, it felt to me like he was choosing lower taxes for his marriage, 40 years. And, she was thriving and he was regretful. It was fascinating. And I filmed that. I filmed him going down there. I filmed her finding an apartment and, kind of spreading her wings. But, at some point, about a year later, I realized that films need drama and families need, and my brother and I decided to help them get back together. And I put that footage on the shelf.
Yeah, definitely has a happy ending. So it's a
Mhm.
great piece of film, no question. Brings out a lot of different perspectives and has some twists. I think we're going to talk about more here. How does your brother? Does his opinion? I mean, what's interesting about your perspective is, I would say normally, and I didn't have a trust fund. I didn't come from that background, but I've come across a few people who have, and I would say typically there's almost a sense of entitlement. So I would have expected a sense of entitlement, like, hey, my father passes and I should get his inheritance. And really, kind of the film, you're bringing out a point that says, we should be looking this as a more holistic view, and it makes for a very interesting, topic for everyone, because now it's the question of what is inheritance? How do we pass that down? But how do you and your brother differ? Is it similar? I mean, I'm sure you get along well, but how is that perspective taken between the two of
We
you?
are different. I mean, he, being the oldest, definitely kind of stayed closer to home in terms of expectations. He went to law school. He was in finance. Um, he,
Ah, very much like the
yeah,
father. Because your father we didn't mention, but he Harvard
yeah,
Law, right?
he was an editor of the Harvard Law Review, and uh, you know, uh, my brother is in some ways a lot more like my dad, but he also has made certain choices in his life not to be as aggressive or um, you know really wound as my dad. But we have
I
he's
think
more
that's a goal we all
conservative than I
make,
am.
right? That's
What was that?
I was gonna say, I think that's a goal we all
Yeah,
make, right? We try
I
to.
guess so. But
All of
I
our
know
fathers
people
are a
that
bit too we try.
try to be like their dads, and if dads
Mm,
are aggressive assholes. They try to best them, and I just couldn't do it. Be- well, and partly because I saw how unhappy that made my dad in the end. It's not as though it was a great strategy for life for him. It just, in some ways, he couldn't help, and um,
right.
but yeah, I mean, in terms of like this family money, there are a couple of things kind of come into play. One is that I grew up in the 70s and 80s. My dad had this depression era mentality. So, and my kids will tell you that they're getting the trickle down of that, so to speak. Um, so we were not um, allowed to, be frivolous and or ostentatious. And also, like they were very clear, or he was very clear that this money that he made was not. I mean, it was for me to live and be secure and do the work that I want to do. But this was money for my grandchildren, and that it was to be taken care of and passed down. And so there's a sense of responsibility and a sense of it's not. Also, like I don't go into amounts in this film because I kind of feel like that's petty.
Yeah, right.
The reality is that when my dad was president of Sony, CEOs made like 80 times the average worker, and now it's like 800 times. So uh,
Yeah,
it's dramatically less money than CEOs are making. I mean, he invested and did well, but I'm way closer to the poorhouse than I am, you know, Elon Musk or anything like that.
right.
So, um,
Right. Was there ever a moment where you felt like, oh, we do have wealth, or it really was just your father talking about it? I mean, was there a conversation or a moment that kind of brought this out?
um, I mean, there was, I remember after he was at Sony, he worked with Murdoch, and he was proud. And there were times where he couldn't contain the fact that, like, oh, he got this big check. Um, but I think, and this is in the film, when you're a kid, you're a kid. You don't know. It's just like my cousin who grew up in the same house with my dad. Uh, we didn't know we were poor. We were just, like everybody else in the neighborhood. And when you're little, it probably is similar if you're well off, um, until you leave your bubble and you see uh, what's going on in the world. And there's a story in the film where, when I was 6 or 7, I started going to this fancy private school up in the Bronx and taking a bus through Harlem in the 1970s was, I feel like, as educational as anything I learned at school. Um, Literally, you're a mile from your doorman building, and they're just shells of burned out buildings. And I began to realize, you know, there was a lot that I didn't understand, um, and you know, that's part of, I think, what makes me want to be a documentary filmmaker. I'm interested in trying to understand find some answers. I don't go into these films to make with a necessarily like a answer to a problem. I'm kind of looking for it or exploring it. I don't think anything is black and white. I mean, there are many movies out there that are really polemics that I find hard to watch on either side of the spectrum. And I personally don't think this should be a partisan issue.
As you went through Harlem, you said that's kind of what helped guide you to want to be a filmmaker. Does that mean you wanted to put a voice where voices aren't heard? Is that what you mean by that kind of
I mean, there
inspiring
is
you
that.
to become
I
a
mean,
filmmaker?
that is kind of the documentary tradition. But I mean it slightly differently in that I was trying to better understand what was happening outside the window. And, my life in 35 years of shooting documentaries, the camera is like this key that opens any door and enables me to go places, whether it's, the White House or, I've made great films about it's shooting heroin. So uh, it, it's permission to enter people's lives. Um, and that there's ethical problems with that in some ways. I mean, you're the guy telling the story in the end, and you have the camera.
The st-
Um, and there is this documentary tradition of kind of telling the story of the downtrodden, and I think the impulse is good, and people mean well, but that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this film was I saw this as an opportunity to tell a story of privilege that is rarely kind of examined at all. And I thought that I had a certain responsibility to try.
Yeah. And your story is one that is really poignant for now because there is this, what they're terming as the silver tsunami about to come and wave over us. And this silver tsunami, to just throw some data out there for all of us, it's estimated to be around 30 trillion. The baby boomers, I think it's about 4 million a year are turning 60. And the next 4 to 5 years, the last of them will finally be 65. I don't mean finally by 65 by any means, but just being in retirement age. And so as they all start to retire and then pass on, this entire amount of wealth will be handed down. This will not be a abnormal thing. If you look at the families and some of the largest wealth, as we talked, you mentioned the Murdochs, there's the Koch brothers, the Waltons. If you look at the top 100, you'll find that most of the wealthiest people on the planet is now inherited wealth. And so it's definitely something that is, going to be, part of the next and upcoming generation. As that happens, the big, beautiful bill has been earmarked to include an increase from, I think it's around 13.5. It's going to be around 15 million. And so that'll be an estate exemption. And so that's, if it's a married couple, they'll get 30 million exemption. The unique thing about that is they can give it away while they're alive. So you can give away $30 million while you're alive, or you can save it until you die. It's the same 30 million. You can exempt however you want to do it. And so it's a unique factor. That's estate taxes. Not every, but I think there's like 30 states that have inheritance taxes. That's once you receive it. So the first is estate and then your inheritance tax. And so there's strategies all around how to avoid and how to do that. And so right now in the US, the top 10% control about 70%, 76% of the wealth as the best number I could find for estimating that. But as all of this happens, and I know the point of your film is to really be thought provoking for everyone to think about, what is happening. But one of the bigger impacts that happens is all this wealth. We can talk about all this wealth coming down to the next generation. And there's 2 points of this. They have to deal with this wealth. How are they going to deal with this wealth? Did they have? I mean, many of their fathers may not have been as miserly and astute to educate their sons and their daughters on how to receive this wealth and take care of it. So it could be one where I grew up in Southern Oregon on a Native American reservation. We were all poor, but if you turned 18, you got some reservation money, and you'd get about $20,000. And it was very common to buy a car, throw a party. And that was just, how you squandered your
Right. Well,
$20,000.
that's
And so
fascinating.
it was, you were worse off most of the time. You were worse off most of the time than when you started. So having this, how do you think that's going to change society with this large amount of
Mm,
wealth? I mean, now being in somewhat of that position, how would you do it? Taking from you as one anecdotal
mm.
story to being now you have an entire society that's now dealing with
Right.
the same
Well,
exact
it's
conundrum.
interesting, but I think that we need to contextualize a little bit this tsunami of the aging and the tsunami of wealth transfer. That's first thing that's interesting is that in my film, one of the first interviews I did was with Robert Reich, and he used that $30 trillion figure in the next generation, $30 trillion. Now, in the 7 years since I did that interview, that number is up over 100 trillion. It has
Oh, wow.
almost tripled. Um, and that is because the wealth at the top has really exploded. So, I mean, I think it would be amazing if that wealth transfer was affecting the lives of um, many Americans, but unfortunately, it's really staying at this top 1% level. I mean, and so that.
Well, to your point, estate tax only accounts for, 1.2% of revenue. So it
Well,
really not a lot of estate
the
revenue
thing,
ends up,
the reason
coming
though,
from
I
it.
mean, that is also a little of a tricky number because the reason why it's so low is because it's so easy to avoid paying the estate tax. Um, if
Right.
people pay, uh, you know, anywhere near what they're supposed to pay, I'm not saying suggesting people do anything illegal. I'm just saying the system that has been created. It's I think Secretary Cohn of the first Trump administration said only morons pay the estate tax because it's just.
Well, Trump even said that with Hillary
Yes, yeah, it
Clinton,
makes
right?
them smart. And that's fine. And my dad felt the same way. It was kind of partly a game, partly an obsession. It was easy, and who wouldn't do it? You can create a trust, you can take advantage of this step basis. Um, and I think that if it weren't having kind of detrimental impact on our democracy, it wouldn't be a problem. The rich people have their money and enjoy it and hopefully spend it and stimulate the economy. But, the fact of the matter is this kind of American dream that my dad lived, which was social mobility, working hard, getting ahead, it has really flatlined in America in the past 30 years. I mean, I think we're 27th now in social mobility. Um, and, and I think a part of that is that this money that used to be paid to the state tax into the government is not being paid anymore. And there are these barriers that people are facing that my dad didn't have. My dad went to college and law school on the GI Bill for a whole generation of Americans, millions and millions of people got low income loans to buy homes. Those homes have grown in value, created family wealth that are being passed down, which is amazing. But the cost of school right now is prohibitive. Um, the cost of healthcare, the cost of all these things. Um, and so, I think that there's plenty of room for a middle ground. I do think that the way it's set up now, where it's just so easy to avoid paying taxes, and also the wealthy don't get income either. That they um, borrow against stock, so they don't pay income tax. They pay 2% interest or something. Um, it needs to change, and that's my hope with this film is we have a discussion about it, because these are decisions that we're making. Um, they're not divine, ordained decisions, winners and losers, and who gets the stimulus of tax incentives. And I think we need to examine it, because otherwise, and this big, beautiful bill is a perfect example, because there's something like $1.7 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthiest, um, including me, and $1.7 trillion in cuts to Medicaid and food stamps. So it's like, uh, and I want to live in a society where my neighbors are not hungry or can go to the hospital when they're like your partner, when their kid is hurt, and not be put into a debt spiral. So I think the wealthiest, I was looking this up the other day, pay an effective rate of 20% estate tax, and you know that is not nothing. Um, but
Right.
it may not be enough for billionaires to only be paying 20%. Mhm. So it's something we need to talk.
To dive in there a little more, do you think your father didn't trust the government? I mean, I'm pulling off
Mhm.
of a Joe Rogan comment, and recently he did an interview, and he really ranked it. He's like, "Well, I can't trust the government with my money. I mean, they would run off with it. They've been inefficient." And so, do you think that is part of the resentment? Because there's a couple of things. I want to put this out as this was not lost on me, and hopefully it's true in my perspective, but you have now come out saying like let's really re-examine, let's assess the inheritance tax and look at if is this the right way, should we not be paying higher taxes? But you were able to go to private school, you were able to enjoy some of the wealth that your father feels like he built on the American dream, and your father was able to build on the American dream having served in the armed forces, the GI Bill that paid for his time to go to school. So it's sort of this conundrum that you having gone up through wealth privately, and then he having used really societal wealth, if you will, to really get that private gain that both of you now are fighting something in the end. And so the question is, do you think he is pushing because he doesn't trust the government, or do you think there's something in inheritance that is more around living longer, a a way to become immortal and keep the legacy going?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, I think my dad. A big part of his focus as he got older was his emotional way of dealing with his mortality. I mean, he saw this money as a way for generations to come to remember him and to appreciate him. So that's part of it. In some ways, my dad was very centrist, and- but he actually did. He trusted the government in that he trusted the system. I would argue with him about social issues, and he would be so focused on the economic issues. And he was like, "Don't worry, there's a pendulum; it swings back and forth, and we're never going to go too far in one direction or the other." Um, and I wonder if he would, you know, how he would feel now, because I feel like some of those structures are breaking. But yeah, there is a problem. It's kind of this self-perpetuating problem where, as the people take the wealthiest stop paying their taxes, find ways around it. partly because of Citizens United, they have now this power to lobby, use their money to lobby to maintain these tax rules. That certain things,
which particularly comes from a few select families
exactly, who $30 million sounds,
who inherited
yeah,
their wealth.
$30 million sounds like a lot, but it's nothing if you're a billionaire. And
Nothing.
and for them to spend $30 million to pass that around congressmen,
Well, the Waltons are, you know, the whole family is in the
you
top
know.
fives.
But the problem is that you don't give money, you reduce the tax base, and then certain things are starved of money. The schools are shitty. Why? Because there's no money. And then you're like, well, I'm not sending my kid to school, and I don't want to pay taxes for this shitty school. So it's self-perpetuating. And so I think we need to remember that in a way that,
But the teachers are like, I can't make any improvements because I'm not getting paid and I have no resources for improvements.
and I just think that we are the richest country, or one of them in the history of the world. That there's plenty of money to go around. I don't think that this is about taking, rich people and making them poor and redistributing money. It's the idea that if you have $1 billion, then maybe, you can pay 30% of your taxes, when you die, and help somebody else go to college. When the estate tax was created by Teddy Roosevelt, who was a Republican, who was facing something very similar with the robber barons who had accumulated so much wealth and power. And a lot of conservative people felt like this was important for our democracy. Lewis Brandeis, this isn't what he said, this Supreme Court justice, you can have a lot of money in the hands of a few people, or you can have democracy. You can't have both. I think that there's also this American idea that goes along with the American dream of working hard. Like, people do it themselves. You work hard, and you're this kind of hero, achieves wealth, and you made it, and you pay your income tax, but then you should be able to do with it what you want. And that's what my dad very articulately says in the movie, which is, I feel wonderful to have him do that. The reality is that, like,
Take advantage of the
yeah,
advantage that he remembers not
yeah.
remembering or doesn't remember.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that, like, the prosperity of America comes from the stability of America, comes from our institutions, comes from our infrastructure, and all that costs money. Now, there are plenty of decisions to be made, and I'm sure there's plenty of money wasted. Question, like, but people complain about people getting wealthy, when the fact of the matter is that is a fraction of the amount, like, wealthy people get from tax deductions. So we just need to be honest. And even the conservative people that I spoke to in the film, I mean, there's Grover Norquist and Frank Luntz and people like that who are proponents of eliminating the estate tax. They understand and that huge wealth inequality is not good for America. And so, yeah, taxes are one part of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, really to dive in that at its point is in 1970, if the ratio between retirees and workers was 3.7. So, and as we know, in the 70s, retirement wasn't
Yeah.
amazing, but it was pretty well. I mean, you had a lot of workers that were able to support the retirees. Social Security was made to be this private fund where you paid into it and you got some later, but it a Social Security built nonetheless. Today, that same ratio is 2.8. So we've lost almost one worker for every retiree to support them. And that will eventually become 2.5 as more retiree, and there's just not enough of us, and there's not enough younger generation to support those workers. And so eventually we'll be missing about 54 million workers to help support a retiring base. And those retirees, the average payout for retirement is around $1,800. In Social Security. And we did a couple episodes again. I'll just pull this data in, but average savings was around $250,000. But if you broke it down by race, it's quite diverse.
Mm.
And then if you broke it down by original education base, then it's very diverse down to where if you're African American without a college degree, you had on average about $5,000 in savings. So it's a tremendous gap. And I struggle with this my own self. I've been very fortunate in my life. I'm a tech entrepreneur. We've had lots of exits, and I have 4 kids. So I kind of feel this both ways where I I see my own children. I see that I've raised socialists, and I hate that. I'm like, oh man, what did I do? How? But at the same time, I feel this where I almost feel I would be more responsible. Now, I wish I could pick someone else because I've become less of an Elon Musk fan over his last
Yeah.
endeavors. But I sometimes would feel more responsible giving to someone like Elon Musk, who would use every dime to put towards productivity, than giving it to the government where it might be wasted. And I feel that conundrum inside of my own self. But at the same time, I feel I don't want to give it to my children because I feel I've raised socialists, and it's like this is wrong too. I'm stuck in somewhat of that balance. But our entire society is now faced with this, where we have this huge tsunami. But as you mentioned, it's really only going to go to maybe about 10% of that population who, we're going to have to pay for this somehow. So taxes are going to go up in the future. So on one side, you could say, well, my kids are going to have more taxes. So I need to save to give them money because they're going to eventually have to pay these life expectancy taxes. But then there's a gigantic population that can't afford any of these taxes,
Well,
and which means there will be somewhat of a wealth gap.
sure. And I mean, there is a wealth gap. When you said that 10% own 70%, 75% of the wealth, the other side of that is that the lower 50% owns 1%,
Nothing.
nothing. And
Right. Yeah.
and those people don't pay taxes. And I mean, they don't pay income taxes. They pay withholding taxes. They actually do pay a lot of taxes. Um, I'm not proposing that taxes should go up for everyone.
Well, I think you meant they have no
Have
wealth.
no wealth.
They right.
And my hope would be that if that 1% paid, you know, 15 or 20% more than the 20% they're paying, that would help create more of a middle class. During in the post-war period, there was this time that they called the Great Compression, where this middle class was created. And Eisenhower was president. The top tax rate was 90%. The economy was amazing, and I mean there are lots of reasons for that, and that 90% was really on the top of the top. But the fact of the matter is that taxes don't inherently destroy the economy. There there's lots of elements to this. I mean, you talk about people retiring in the 1970s. A lot of those people were probably union workers that had pensions. Um, the fact of the matter is that productivity in the United States has gone through the roof. Wages have not moved at all, and we still have a federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. I mean, which is like impossible to have a life that way. I mean, you can argue, oh, we're supposed to stay at minimum wage. Um, and that would be great if there were places to go. I'm a hierarchy, but yeah, I mean, it's and I'm
Let me
not going to
ask,
go
how
there
do you,
because I'm not even thinking of this, but like, there's a whole other side to this conversation about all these people retiring and the low birth rate that involves immigration that should be part of this conversation. And it's also contentious right now. And, that's another part of this movie that I think is important, is the fact that, my dad and I had some bitter differences in our political outlook, but we still really loved each other a lot and respected each other. were able to like fight and then hug and you know, it was a different time, but I feel like we need more of that. We need to be able to have these conversations. I think when it comes down to it, we all want the same things. You know, we want our kids to be secure. We want our kids to be motivated. We want there to be, you know, an environment that they can go out in and not sick. So it doesn't have to be like this. And also like this idea of America being a meritocracy feels like a very conservative thing. You know, we want people to work hard and get ahead. We want people to have that opportunity, and and it's not happening. And if you have like, you know, 100,000 kids who are inheriting tens of millions of dollars, and everybody else is struggling, we got a problem. So
You've made this film as I originally related with your father. So
sure,
that's where I felt. But then as you go into it, then you start to relate to you. And I think that's the point of it is you're trying to say we should be having this thought-provoking idea in our own self. I mean, this is going on for all of us. As you've kind of done this, how does this now give you a different perspective? I know you have one
I've got
kid,
two boys, one
two,
just
two
graduated,
kids, two kids.
and
Oh, wow.
yeah, thanks.
Congratulations. Unfortunately,
Um, you know,
I miss mine. Mine when they went, I'm like, I don't know. My youngest is about to leave, and I think I'm going to move with her. I don't know if
I mean,
I
it's
can.
so bizarre to experience that. I mean, and it's very relevant to this movie because you know my dad got sick with cancer, and in 2007 and 2008, 6 months before he passed away, my first son was born, and I was in this position where my dad was dying of cancer, and my baby boy was keeping me up all night, more my wife, but me too. And uh, I, who had been like this, you know, I mean, my dad and I was not a kid anymore, but I had really kind of pushed back against my dad. And now I had a different perspective. I had a new appreciation for this kind of really unquantifiable desire to like protect your child. And so that also kind of helped me to kind of look at this film and look at my dad differently. And you know, think about what is inheritance. You know, I got so many things from my dad. Some of them I wish I hadn't. You know, from my temper to like you know, uh, plenty of physical ailments that he complained about that I'm now complaining about. So
Your knee hurts when it
yeah,
rains, and you.
yeah. I guess I owe you a lot. You know, it's interesting. It's about you know we're leaving our kids. We want to leave our kids a healthy democracy and the opportunity. Was a Warren Buffett said, you want to leave your kids enough so they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. Um, and you
Exactly.
know, we need to also leave them a you know a fertile ground to plant their seeds. So, um, uh,
I love it, Justin. So tell us, give us a wrap up of the film, when it's, where we can find it, when it's coming
yeah, I
out.
mean, you know, for better or worse, it's coming out at this moment where this is being debated, and I think that's great, and I would really hope it becomes part of the conversation. We are opening theatrically in New York on July 17th at the IFC Center, and then we're heading to LA and around the country, and to have hopefully some conversations after the film. Um, and then in the fall, we're going to be streaming, I imagine, and also going to universities. Um, so yeah, it was a challenging film to make a film about my dad, but I feel good about it, and I feel like you know in many ways it's a love letter to him, an appreciation to him and my mom, and I also
Well, I think that's kind of the nice recap is if it is him trying to be immortal, you got to take this argument, which he was against, and use it to help make him
yeah,
immortal.
it's
And
true.
so I
He
thought that
got
was, you know, very important. In fact, he ends up quoting Macbeth But I was really thinking like, it should have quoted
And
Hamlet. It would have been like a much better kind of fitting to the story.
yeah. And you know, and I do also think that my kids and grandkids will watch this and learn a little bit about me. It's interesting.
I think it's great. Appreciate it, Justin. The film coming out July 7th, Death and Taxes.
July 17th.
And July
Yeah.
17th, July 17th, starting in New York, coming around to LA, but you'll find it all over. We will have a link to where you can find the website. I
Yeah.
assume that'll say where it's playing. So check it out.
Thank
Death and
you.
Taxes. Really appreciate you joining us today, Justin.
But this was a lot of fun, man. I appreciate it.